Wildwood, of course, at the time we called it the Stranahan Estate, is one of those magical places where nature and culture come together, where you have this really interesting confluence of the impact of humans on the land and the land itself. Because this is part of the oak openings region, it has these magnificent oaks and some open savannas and prairies and rare species of animals and plant life. That in itself is really intriguing and powerful. And you merge that with its historical and cultural significance. Toledo's economy, it doesn't get any bigger than the Stranahans. I mean, you know, champion spark plug. And we knew that if it was developed, all of that would be lost.
The biggest thing that strikes me over and over again when I come here is to watch all the people enjoying the park and realize how close it came to not happening at all. And I don't know that there's any way to communicate all of the effort, all of the emotion, all of the sacrifice that went into saving this property.
You don't love what you don't know. And if it's foreign to you or if it's unfamiliar to you, you don't care about it. And that's the value, the critical value of education with and appreciation for and attachment to and involvement in nature and natural programs and nature education. You know, we've got the perfect place to live that's been 4 billion years in the making, and it's the only place we've got to live. And the message is if we don't take care of it, we're not going to be here.
I think as you age, one of the things you learn is that the things that really make you happy, the things that are really worthwhile in life, many times don't cost money. Going to a park with your family and having a picnic is better than going out for a $100 meal.
When you ask folks to describe what is a Metropark, you'll get a number of answers, and you'll get a number of different values that come forward. Things like the Manor House, or perhaps the gardens or the landscaping around the Manor House. Some people come specifically just to use the trails, either for nature walks and hiking or walking. Folks identify themselves from where they come from. And a park like Wildwood is a part of where people come from. And so when you've got the historical story of the Stranahans, the historical story of how this property was acquired, the ecological significance of this relationship of the sand dunes and the oak openings, that relationship spills over into Wildwood, the history associated with Ottawa River, all of those things factor in, but it comes together as a totality that it will be here forever.
The biggest thing was the mystique. It was the place that you drove past on Central Avenue, and you could just sort of get a hint that it was back there. You knew it was a big property, and you could, I remember going past and seeing the pillars, the big portico, but just a hint of it, not the whole building. You just knew there was something big back there.
Well, it was one of those kind of behind the scenes places. It was off limits, except that I was working for the family business, which was a rental company downtown, imported foods. And a lot of what my grandfather called the carriage trade, or the wealthier people, ordered from him, and I would have to deliver the stuff. So as a young guy, in my teens, I came out here on multiple occasions. I got as far as the kitchen. Everybody knew it was the Stranahan property. And they knew that, you know, you weren't allowed to go on the estate unless you had business to go there.
I was here as a kid. We'd heard about this Stranahan estate that was going to become a Metropark, and us, like thousands of other people, would drive by. That's about all I knew at that time. It wasn't until I started working for the Park District in 1983 that I began to realize what an incredible citizen campaign it was to get Wildwood to become a park.
It's real important to keep an idea or keep in your mind what was going on across the country and the nation in the 70s. And it's easy to forget that, you know, we had energy crisis, we had a global recession, the country was experiencing double-digit inflation. And so for the community to really move forward with an effort to pass a levy to preserve this open space spoke volumes about another widespread social value that was emerging, and that was this notion of environmental protection and enhancement.
In the 70s, there was a lot of revolution going on. We know there were a lot of racial revolution. There was a lot of environmental revolution. We know rivers were burning. We know fish were dying. And so how could we exert the political pressure necessary to get the laws in place so that there would be something for our grandchildren, something for our great-grandchildren?
We were, you know, full of passion, full of ideas, not all of them good, but we thought they were. So we were ready for action, and the staff, this was a viable, growing, exciting place to be in the early 70s. And then comes the Stranahan estate issue with Bill Mewborn leading the charge, and we were all eager to jump on that bandwagon.
This was a tailor-made test for where was conservation, environmentalism, and so on going.
And that conversation started with a gentleman named Dr. Bill Mewborn, who grew up near the estate, who knew the estate intimately, knew some of the family members.
Riding horseback, I was over on the estate riding all around it and crossing the creek and all that stuff. And with Bob Stranahan, who unfortunately is gone now.
And that's when it all came together, that Bill Mewborn was coming to us, pleading for us to join him in the effort to save the Stranahan estate, now Wildwood Preserve. And it sounds so easy to say it, but it was a lot of steps and a lot of things to go through. First, Bill had to convince Bob Metz, the director, that there was enough public support to warrant putting an issue on the ballot.
I ran into him at a couple of Metroparks citizens meetings, stuff like that. And I said, you know, that really ought to become a park. And he said, yeah, it should, but we don't have the money for it and all those lame excuses. And I said, well, let's get going. So he had me talk to the park board, and they said, if you get enough people with enough that'll sign the papers, say, we'll support you. And that's when I started my talking.
And once you get Bob Metz on your side, he was an immovable object or an irresistible force, whatever you choose. When he got behind something, it was something else. And when Bill and Bob got together, it was just dynamic. It was an exponential amount of passion and emotion going after this.
Bob Metz, he was pro anything parks, and he was very much in favor of doing it. And he and Art Weber, through this whole, it took a year and a half, where I could always go to them and ask them questions. And without those two guys, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Bill will downplay his role in all this, but I will tell you for a fact that Wildwood Preserve would not be here were it not for Dr. Bill Mewborn. It all started with him. We knew about the estate, but it took Bill pushing us off that cliff, saying, I can make this happen if you work with me, to take us to the point where we could put all the things in motion to make this happen.
I was not politically motivated at all. And when I talked to Bob, he's the one that said, well, you know, we're thinking about it, we don't have the money. And he's the one that told me about Cavalier.
Bob Cavalier is well known in town for luxury property development, so on. Obtained an option to buy the 465 acres, which remained of the original. I think the original estate was like 753. It had been whittled down a little over the years. He had announced this proposal to convert this into a luxury residential community of both luxury homes on over beautiful sites like overlooking this ravine, and also condominiums, et cetera, et cetera.
And there definitely were two sides. You know, there was the development side, and this was a very desirable area to be building in, especially since the family was disposing of the estate. Even the family was split. you know, and I'm not privy to much of that other than I know that there were definite splits, that some felt that it should happen and some felt it shouldn't, and others just sort of said, well, let's just get it over with.
There were people like me and Ted Ligabell who had come up through our college years as part of that revolution of environmental change. And plus coupling that with Audubon, who at that point in history really wanted to change the world with environmental legislation. And so what could we do? We could help harness the power of the people.
So when it became clear that there was going to be a battle to save this estate, you know, I'm young and I grew up in the 60s and I'm ready to go. You know, I'm an activist, and I, like many people, firmly believe that this had to happen.
The Manor House provides the space for many of our administrative offices. But in addition to that, it has some grand rooms that have been restored thanks to a host of volunteers and devoted individuals who really appreciate and value the history that's represented in the building.
The biggest structure on the property is the Manor House, what we now call the Manor House. They called Stranahan. That was the biggest feature, obviously, that magnificent pillared home from the, I think it was built between 1936 and 38.
And as early as I can remember, we had the big Holiday at the Manor House event, which was something that has always been for free. There's no charge for it. People would come through that house, and there was just so much excitement about it because it was a new park at that time. It was our newest Metro Park.
I think everybody wants to see how the early industrialists lived. There's something mystique about that. They made Toledo part of what it is today.
Designed by Toledo's most prominent architectural firm of Mills, Rhine, Spellman, and Nordhoff, of concrete. So, you know, it's going to be there forever. They designed it to be there forever and ever. But it had whole ancillary buildings associated with it, such as there was a pool, which has now been filled in, but the pool house is still there, and that's been converted to restrooms, public restrooms.
Right next to that are the formal gardens, which has the gazebos, the wrought iron and brick gazebos. If there's a better place to spend an afternoon just taking in a garden and watching the birds come and go, I don't know what it would be. Right down the road, up the estate lane, is Metroparks Hall. Also a very great looking building, as all the buildings here were. All the estate buildings were very nice. That was a limousine garage.
The biggest building that's been lost was the old riding arena, which was incredible. I mean, I remember going in it many times, and it was a massive wooden frame building, all open on the inside, really 3 stories high, where they had indoor riding when they couldn't ride outside, or if they were doing dressage or fancy show horses. And it had a little party room attached to it and a big fireplace at the end.
Just to the west is the stables. It was the stables. It's now Met's Visitor Center. Obviously, it had stalls, and it also had quarters where meetings could occur, and there was also a place upstairs for a manager to live, a livery manager. We've turned that into offices and public space as well, and the 2 wings that were all stables are now also part of the park mission, including the window on wildlife.
Which is the oldest window on wildlife in the Park District, so it's not only established well for people, but the birds and the wildlife know about it. They actually recognize it. Things come back year after year after year, so it's a really active window on nature.
The copper cupola on that building, to me, is one of the real iconic things about Wildwood Preserve. Not that it represents our preservation image, but it certainly is a throwback to the 1930s and what the elegance of this place. It's also the portal to the trail system here at Wildwood, which is very important to people, whether you're a runner, a walker, a naturalist leading a school group. It's beautiful to go through that portal and enjoy the ravines and the trails here.
And I was privileged to be able to rent the farmhouse at Wildwood starting in 1986. And that farmhouse, it's that old brick 1880 farmhouse that you drive by on Central Avenue, and it looks so, it looms over Central Avenue. It resonates with history. And I got to live in there, and I was just thrilled. I thought it was the best thing in the world that could ever have happened to me, for me to be able to live in the place that I work, be able to be that close to it, learn that much just by sitting on my porch.
The Ward Pavilion is a lovely facility that a lot of folks use and rent and reserve. And the Ward Pavilion was named after the Park System's director, Gene Ward, who was a remarkable individual as well. And there's a schoolhouse that was moved onto the property, and it provides an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about how education was approached in the last century.
So initially that was not on our property. We brought it into the park, which was an interesting challenge in and of itself. An all brick structure of that age, but that was done in the early 2000s, late 1990s. Lots of footage of that schoolhouse inching its way down Quarry Road and to the site where it sits now, where we interpret what a one-room school would have been like.
So we've got a myriad of buildings here. They all provide very important visitor experiences, and our staff utilize them for programs and educational outreach, in addition to most of them being available for reservable use for the public.
The whole campaign, as we got closer to the election, and this happens with every campaign, there's that slow planning phase that takes you up to sort of, you hit this critical mass in the summertime that you start to realize all the work that's still to be done, and you need people to do this and do that.
Think about it. This is going to be a brand new park. It's huge, and there was something magic about the fact that it was once an industrialist estate. So if you could be part of making that happen, that was a great idea.
People like the Kimballs sort of set aside a whole chapter of their life and dedicated it to doing something. And for some of these people, this was sort of the first grassroots activist thing they had been involved in.
There was one thing that people forget about that would have sunk the whole idea of a Metro Park had it happened. And that was that the roadway plan system for Toledo projected the extension of Reynolds Road right through the property we know now as Wildwood Preserve. It would have cut a wide 4-lane plus swath right through the property, would have divided it into two parts, probably 200 acres on one side, 250 on the other. And all of a sudden you really don't have the property that you want this to be as a Metro Park. You think about, if that would have happened, we probably would have pretty much folded up our tents and walked away. And it's amazing sometimes how little things can turn an entire campaign. And one of the things that Bill needed was, he needed a right-hand man, somebody, an equal, who was good at organizing to make sure all the pieces of the campaign came together the way they needed to be. And the name John Lusk kept coming up to Bill. Bill knew of John, but he didn't have a personal relationship with him, but had heard that John might be the guy to make some things happen, because John was very active in the community. So active that when Bill first asked John, the answer was no. I've got too much stuff on my plate, he said. I really can't bring myself into yet another project.
Well, I met him through the fight, and I got to know him. He was with citizens and so forth, and then I was going to speak at the Reynolds Road Exchange Club. And afterwards I said, I got to talk to you.
This was in the summer before the election in '74, and he convinced John to sit in the car with him for a little while he pitched the idea of, John, would you step into the campaign as my co-chair and sort of be the organizer for the campaign while I'm the spokesperson and the emotional, the firecracker, you know, that makes all the noise and makes things happen.
And, oh no, not going to be. And just then the skies opened up and we had a horrendous thunderstorm. It lasted 20 minutes. And right near the end of the 20 minutes, he said, okay. But he was a busy guy anyway, you know, with all this stuff. Busy people tend to find ways to get things done.
But as Bill told me one time, he said, it's a good thing the storm lasted as long as it did, because I needed the last 10 minutes to convince him. But the end of the story is John, of course, said yes. He became a very integral part of the campaign, became a co-chair with Bill of the campaign. And without him, I'm not sure that it all would have come together the right way.
Those two just did hundreds and hundreds of presentations to community groups. They would, groups from 2 to 200. They would speak to anywhere, anytime. And I think what came through all of that, and for all of us too, was the passion.
I think Bill Mewborn is one of those unique people that probably has endless energy. And he believed in this. He was an outdoorsman, he was a veterinarian, he liked animals and what have you. And he said, in essence, don't tell me it can't happen. Now, John Lusk was a businessman, very astute, and the two of them were the perfect combination of people to get together.
But there it was, and so when the issue came forward, Bill Mewborn brought it to our Audubon Society, the Maumee Valley Audubon Society, and it was through that organization that we began harnessing volunteers to get engaged.
I saw this as a real opportunity, and when you started seeing all kinds of people from all over the community coming together, meeting on Tuesday afternoons or Saturday mornings or whatever, it was a very empowering thing. And you got to the point where you said, this is the right thing to do. This needs to happen.
And so when you think about it, how did you win a campaign back in the 70s? We didn't have computers. We had our phones. We had letter writing. We had the ability to print publications, and we had 2 feet and an automobile. So what we would do is harness our members to go out to different communities. We canvassed the whole county.
They came up with some things that became valuable in the campaign to talk about, Wildwood is your backyard. There was a shift, and probably a growing shift, away from single-family residential where you have your backyard and your own barbecue and all that sort of thing, to an apartment with no property at all, and the Metroparks become your backyard. We'd never promoted the Metroparks as being your backyard, but essentially that's what we were becoming.
And so we would go in some incredible neighborhoods, and we would take different sides of the street. We would ring doorbells if somebody was home, explain the project, or put the pamphlet under the door and urge people to get out and vote.
What I find special here is, first of all, we're on the edge, but we're a part of the oak openings region, which is special in and of itself. It's one of the rarest ecosystems on Earth.
And then there's this maze of wonderful, wonderful trails. Some of them form bridle paths from the estate. You can literally hike here and walk here for hours.
And then at Wildwood, we also have a very healthy upland contiguous woods that has nice ravines through it, which people love because they can jog on hills in Northwest Ohio, and that doesn't happen just anywhere. And it's got this beautiful shaded woodland ecosystem that doesn't have as many rare things, but still provides eco services that are very important to the community, to the bird life, to the wildlife.
It's the number of habitats that are here that is so special. The tallgrass prairie, my absolute favorite tree in the whole park system is here. The big black oak out in the meadow, huge spreading oak tree, classic, which actually was the inspiration for the logo of the park district.
A great stanza of spring wildflowers. So many of our spring wildflowers had been destroyed with development, and to see trillium, hepatica, bloodroot, rue anemone carpeting the floor.
The Ottawa River in some places is called 10 Mile Creek, and in some places it's called the Ottawa River. It's the same body of water. It's over 300 miles in its watershed. The reason it's not technically a part of the Maumee River watershed is because its tributary goes out in the Maumee Bay. It's not exactly a tributary of the Maumee River like Swan Creek is or some of our other creeks. So it's its own watershed, but it's a relatively small one compared to the Maumee River watershed.
The lower end, of course, down down toward Maumee Bay and then on up through the industrial area has suffered from an industrial legacy that we're still paying for and still catching up with, but it's getting better and better and better. We've got all kinds of species of fish now in this whole watershed that surprise people. Largemouth bass, northern pike, steelhead trout will even work their way up. Strays, they're not, this is not a trout stream by any means, but strays will work their way up from Maumee Bay and Lake Erie.
Also becomes very important for people because when we preserve floodplains, we stop flooding further downriver.
When we have these huge rain events that we seem to be having more and more frequently, where does that water go? Well, if it wasn't for all these floodplains that are preserved in the parks, that water would be in your basement, it would be keeping your car from going down the street, whatever it might be.
And eventually spill out wherever it can, which could be Douglas Road or could be Secor Road, it could be anywhere. But so the goal of preserving floodplains is just paramount for healthy city management. The more we have floodplains, the less we have flooding. So the Ottawa River floodplain is a really important ecosystem here.
And in the river that you see behind me, we have about 50 feet of relief. And in the banks, there's layers of sediment that are exposed. And those layers of sediment tell you the natural history of the area. So the glaciers came down from Canada, went through this area about 30,000 years ago. So there was a lake here for about 3,000 years. And this lake fell in a series of steps. And when it stabilized at these steps, it built up beaches. The Oak Openings Ridge is one of those beaches that was deposited in this lake 14,000 years ago.
The oak savanna is one of the most globally rare habitats left. We have a beautiful patch of it here in Northwest Ohio.
And what happens there is because it's sandy, you have oaks and openings because the sand doesn't support a lot of thick, rich vegetation like that. Instead, it supports sparsely populated specialists that can live in these sandy environments.
And the sand dunes, which we've dated, were last active about 8,000 to 13,000 years ago. So we're dealing with, from our perspective, a very old landscape. Geologically, it's young, but it's preserved here at Wildwood.
Historically, Native Americans used the area and through their burning and so forth, they kept the openings open. But some of these gorgeous oaks and other trees here would have been common historically.
When you're down by the Ottawa River, the kinds of plants and animals you're going to see the most include things like, well, everything's going to the river for water. So you're going to see your common things, the medium-sized mammal type things, raccoon, skunk, they're all down there.
You'll see red fox, you may see coyotes, you may, of course, squirrels are everywhere.
And then, of course, it's going to have a lot of the rare birds. The Oak Openings ecosystem here at Wildwood is going to have the ground nesters. It's one of the reasons we encourage people to stay on the trails.
We are an area that is a mecca for bird watchers to come not only from around the United States, but now with this new festival that we have, the biggest week in American birding. People have come from many foreign countries as well during the month of May to this area, specifically Lucas and Ottawa counties, because birds that are migrating north, most of these birds have wintered in the tropics, Central and South America, and they come north, headed for Canada, heading for various places to the north of us. Now, I would say that probably the best place to see something a little unusual in Wildwood would be to walk the floodplain, where we have lots of woodpeckers. Particularly, I want to mention the pileated woodpecker, which is our largest woodpecker. It's a crow-sized woodpecker. And that bird was thought to have been extirpated, removed from Lucas County. So they're making a recovery, which is a very nice thing. Birds capture our sense of wonder. They're colorful, they sing, they fly immense distances. They're remarkable in so many ways that maybe it's in our genes to be hunters, collectors, and by birding and keeping bird lists or taking bird photographs, it's a more civilized, perhaps, form of capturing the bird, of hunting the bird. It's just the same, I think it's the same sort of thing, being channeled into, you know, more present-day, modern kind of way of dealing with nature.
Bill had a lot of people that came to him that, to this day, I don't know who donated the money, but there was a family that instead of giving themselves Christmas presents, decided to buy a full-page ad in the Blade to promote saving the Stranahan estate. I mean, that's the kind of thing that almost brings tears to your eyes.
Well, Virginia Clifford, on the League of Women Voters, on the tabloid, she had the saying that we used that was, the Metroparks aren't expensive, they're priceless. And that should always be used. We had Louise Torgerson who came in, I got a little bit of money here, but what do you want to do? And I said, well, we don't have any money buying any bumper stickers. So she went out and had a bunch of bumper stickers made.
We would go door to door. We got Boy Scout troops to cover practically every neighborhood in Toledo and put brochures in the door so people knew about this. And this is our campaign. This is the people's campaign. This is something we the people are going to have. And then you'd translate that down to, well, what's that going to cost the average homeowner per year? And it looked like a relatively small amount of money, and it worked.
Bill Mewborn was a local veterinarian, and he received a call in the midst of the campaign from someone who said, do you need to come out here and help? There's a deer trapped in the culvert at Olender Park. And there is a big concrete culvert that drains the pond there. And it was trapped in there and couldn't get out because the sides are fairly high, and it was doing a lot of damage to itself. So they called Bill, and he went out there with, I think, a couple of his associates and managed to get the deer out of the culvert. Well, it was pretty injured.
Probably anybody else would have said, well, we got to get this thing out of here and get it back into the wild. Bill saw opportunity. And what he orchestrated, and you know, the deer, it was returned to the wild very quickly, but the wild it was returned to was present-day Wildwood Preserve.
I picked it up through the back of my station wagon, took it over here, and fed it acorns and hay and corn and that until we needed them the Sunday, I think it was the Saturday or Sunday before the election on a Tuesday.
We decided to release it on the estate and call the media. That was a really interesting day because we picked the deer up over at his office and we put it in the back of his station wagon. And a couple of us, and wrapped it in a blanket, and a couple of us laid down with it to sort of keep it calm. We pull it out and unwrap it, and you know how deer sometimes do this, it stomps around a little bit and turns around, looks right at the camera, goes right up to the camera, peers in, and then takes off.
And the deer hopped the split rail fence and bounded into the meadow, and it was this scene out of Bambi or something. It was just wonderful. It was something that helped cement the whole campaign. And interestingly, just about that time is when we started to see a little bit of shift in public attitude.
Well, that was the best PR we ever could have imagined, you know, because it was on the news. People were talking about it. You know, wishing they'd been there, but I mean, we couldn't really publicize it because it was totally illegal.
Well, the next day in the paper, you see this kind of romantic, warm, fuzzy story about this deer going back into this natural place that should be a Metropark. But just things like that Bill was thinking every minute, how can I get this in front of the public? He was an artist at it.
And then the coup d'etat, from our perspective, was a meeting with Paul Block, the publisher of The Blade, which resulted in Steve Pollack being asked to do a story, which appeared in Toledo Magazine the week before the election, called Land as Good as Gold.
I had developed a beat as the environmental reporter on the city desk in the general assignment pool, along with other duties, and Paul Block Jr., the publisher, apparently had taken enough note of that to appear in the city room one day, and I had written some park stories, little bits and pieces of this, and so had others along the way, but he says, I want to do a Toledo Magazine story about this.
He tried to do an even-handed story. It just so happened that Cavalier was reluctant to talk, so he wasn't able to present both sides of the story as he normally would, which worked great for us because we were able to be, you know, front and center.
What I learned, of course, when I got out here, it having been a private estate, hadn't been on it, and started seeing this spectacular land, and I said, wow, this is going to be an issue. Land as good as gold can be seen two ways, good as gold, real estate gold, or as good as natural gold, in terms of the intangible treasures in nature. All you have to do today is see all the people in this park this morning. The parking lot is jammed with people enjoying this land as good as gold, but it would also have made a lot of money for Cavalier development had it been bought and turned into residential.
It just all clicked in a way that really put the Stranahan estate forward as this would be a great park. All we need is your support. We need this half-mil levy to make it happen. And it followed with an editorial from the Blade recommending that you vote for the levy. So the Blade was really key in this. But going into the election night, we were on pins and needles.
From the beginning, I think that was a primary motivator, that this could be one of the greatest outdoor education centers in Ohio, maybe even the country.
Park interpretation and natural resource and historic interpretation is about connecting people to what they have around them in a way that gives them not just an intellectual understanding, but an emotional, pull on the heartstring sort of feeling about that particular resource.
Many years later, then, the opportunity to get a one-room schoolhouse came into reality. And the schoolhouse was just north on Corey Road, and it served, you know, this rural community back 100 more years ago.
And the goal was to teach people to use the schoolhouse and use lessons from the old schoolhouse to teach people about how things have changed over time. A lot of times associated with the schoolhouse, we'll have a nature walk, which then leads kids outside of the living history component, leads kids down to the Ottawa River to teach them how the children would have crossed that Ottawa River by foot, possibly, to teach them where the pawpaw trees grow when we sing, "Where, oh, where is Sally? Way down yonder in the pawpaw patch." So we try to interrelate the nature experience with what kids would have seen then and what kids see today here at Wildwood Park.
They take us out into the meadow, into the Metropark areas, and they show us different kinds of leaves. They show us different animal homes. They allow the children to touch some of the leaves and to see some of the animals that exist here. Typically what we do at the end of our nature experience is we write a story. And then when we go back to school, we reread that story and we talk about what they experienced. And it's just been wonderful.
You know, one of the main things I always say is the true learning is when you're able to be hands-on. And so there's one thing of learning about carbon dioxide in a book and learning about the grass and the trees and etc. from a science book. But it's another thing to actually do the experiment here at the location. And so those are the benefits of schools collaborating with Metroparks and making sure that kids get out and get a holistic understanding of what it means to be out in the wildwoods as well as Wildwood Park.
And one of the other real values to the environment here for us at the university is bringing students here on field trips. And in the classroom, we talk to the students about various landforms and various processes by which the rivers operate. But when we get the students out here on a field trip and we can show them the landforms, we can see some of the sediments, and we actually see processes taking place before our eyes, the students get a much better understanding of the landscape.
Do you remember back in the 70s, volunteering was not that big of a thing? Most places didn't have an active volunteer corps. And so all of a sudden, with the rich history that the Manor House provided for us, we had some wonderful positions for people who like being inside, like to share the history. Like my mother, she did all the artwork for the Manor House signage. My father would go down and host some of the art exhibits in, I think, the former garage area. Some of my students would lead nature walks here as volunteers.
The volunteers that we have here at the Metroparks hit just about every facet of what we do. And they get trained. Our job is to train them well, help them represent the Park District, but they are our investment. They are invested themselves in the natural areas and in connecting people to our Metroparks, to the nature, to the history, to the people, because really it's all one.
As election time approached, we had an inkling that we were doing better. So what had kind of been working against despair was slowly turning into this, we just might be able to do this. So more energy went into the campaign. Election day, people were at the polls, we were everything that we could think of to do, we were doing. The early returns came in and we were close. And I thought, oh my God, we just might do this. I saw that as a really good sign.
Well, the night of the election, Bob wanted me to go downtown to election headquarters. I said, why? He said, I've done my work. I said, you know how to do this stuff. And he called me that night and he said, looks like we got it. He knew which wards and which precincts had passed.
The funny thing is that if you talk to people now who were voters in that election, they all voted for us. At least that's what they tell us. We didn't win it by a landslide. We won it by a few percentage points. So, you know, it was emotional right down to the end. And very understandable. You know, if you don't have a job, why would you vote for a levy? If you are concerned about the economy, the oil, the double-digit inflation, I mean, it was easy to see how people would vote against us. But it was a good thing that we were offering, and I'm just glad we were able to put that kind of a spin on it to make people feel that there was enough value here to give us a chance to put together something that I think has proven itself many times over, what a wise decision it was for people to vote for that levy.
Well, there was great excitement, of course, that it passed, and it was almost one of those quixotic, improbable things. It passed. From then on, after the levy was approved, it became more the nuts and bolts technical process.
Because there was a $4 million price tag on the estate, $4 million plus. We had to have that money up front, but up stepped Bob Metz again. He really looked at things in a different way and came up with great ideas. So he started talking to the Nature Conservancy. They were critical because they enabled us to make that purchase before the deadline passed, where we would have lost the estate. Now imagine how the community would have felt about that. They give you the money that you need, or that you say you need, but you can't act fast enough to make their wishes come true. So Nature Conservancy made that happen. And you talk about a big relief. You know, a few months later, we actually were able to sell the bonds, raise the money, pay Nature Conservancy back, and we opened the doors to the property as quickly as we could, and the only way we knew how to do it. There was no parking here, no facilities. So basically, we allowed walk-in traffic from across the street or whatever. It was incredible how much people were interested in seeing how this family lived here. There are photos of that very first day where the line goes all the way out the door and up the driveway and maybe beyond. So the eagerness to see what was here was here from the get-go.
The first bus, the bus driver slowed down and pointed at a deer, and that was great. Yeah, that was great. And that's happened ever since.
When we dedicated Wildwood Preserve, it was a huge party, lots of celebrations, lots of first-time people seeing what a beautiful space it was. I'm sure we took a tour of the Manor House, looked at the pool that was still open, looked at some of the gardens that were still around, walked in some of the barns that hadn't been converted to other uses or torn down. And of course, the real magical part was walking the trails because the wildflowers were magnificent.
I've kept daily field notes ever since 1966, and this is my work notebook from 1975, which was the year that Wildwood first became available. When I wrote my notes, I didn't know what to call the place. I did say Stranahan Estate in my first entry, which is in March 22nd, 1975. When I get to May 26th, it says Wildwood Preserve. So somewhere in there in 1975, we settled on the name.
So the idea that this was a people's park carried through to the planning, to everything, including naming the park, which meant that we opened the mail slots to please send us your suggestions for what you would like this property named. And there were a lot of great suggestions. Oak Hill, I remember being one of them. There were suggestions that it be named after a person by several people. And that was a no-go because this was a citizen's effort. One person's name doesn't belong on this property. Wildwood came up several times as a suggestion.
Bob Metz wanted the name Wildwood because it was wild and wooded and so forth. And I said, as long as you put preserve on it, because we want people to know this is not a place for baseball diamonds or shuffleboards or all that stuff. So we had a contest. And one person had named Wildwood Valley or something, and someone else said, you know, Nature Preserve or whatever it was. And people had my name on it and Bob's name on it and all that stuff. And so we gave it two winners, the one that had the Wildwood name and we gave them an award that had preserve on it.
And now it's, again, it's the centerpiece of the Metroparks, I think. They're all wonderful, but there's only one Wildwood.
Why are parks important? I don't know, let me count the ways. Whether you use parks or not, parks are important in a community. They go directly to the quality of life. If you talk to a company, a corporation, which is supposedly an unfeeling, everything has to be quantified, there's no emotion involved, they will tell you that they measure the value of a community and it influences them whether or not they're going to move into a community. The quality of the schools, the quality of recreation, the quality of parks. A lot of people just come because they like the setting. A lot of people come because they like seeing wildlife that they're familiar with. And the more you see, the more you want to see. It's kind of diabolical the way that works from our perspective, that especially if we can convince you to be a nature photographer, you start to look at things in a close-up way, and it's just impossible not to be fascinated by nature when you start looking at it in little pieces like that.
Take all the trees, all the flowers, all the insects, everything here, and you have an endless source of photography. And we've had several times here in the park seminars with noted national photographers come in and they talk about how to take that picture, when to take it.
You see all kinds of things happening, so your interest is piqued on a lot of levels for a lot of people. And that happens for runners as well, I think. Runners suddenly realize, well, if I walk for a little bit instead of run, I'll be able to study things along the trail. And vice versa. You walk and you go, well, I'd like to get even more out of my physical experience, so you step up to running.
Wildwood is important to me because this is where I really started training. I did my training for my first marathon. Most of it was here at Wildwood. I was 60 pounds heavier, overweight, out of shape. My knees hurt all the time, my back hurt all the time, and had to start with walking and built myself up, built up the mileage, got to where I could run, and I started doing long runs out on the Red Trail and the UT Trail. And I ended up being able to do, after a couple of years, an 18-mile long run on the Red Trail, just going around that loop, and it was just amazing.
People are so nice to one another as they pass each other, whether they're running or walking. I mean, you always acknowledge the other person, and that's unique to, I do a lot of running, I do a lot of traveling, and run in a lot of parks all over the country. And this is probably the friendliest place that I run.
Active recreation and preservation are both parts of the equation for public open space. And so we have these wonderful amenities that we put on our parklands or open space areas, you know, that enable folks to enjoy hiking, trail activities, picnicking, things like that.
Parks are where people, by and large, the bulk of the population meet nature. And it's a question of you want to maintain the natural aspects and beauty of a place, but you don't want it loved to death either.
Like Yellowstone National Park, 90% of the people use 5% of the park, and a lot of people come in, they picnic, they run in the woods and communicate with nature and come back out. But the people that really get down and hike the woods and the floodplains and so forth, go clear to the edges, and those are the ones that really can get the most enjoyment out of it.
Well, my first interaction with Metropark was this 28 years ago. I was on one knee and asked my now wife to marry me here 28 years ago. So that's a little personal connection with Wildwood. And I think everyone comes here and spends time here, and they create moments in their families, whether they're picnicking with their kids or going on a walk or coming to one of our nature camps. People don't remember days, they remember moments, and this is a place that creates moments every day, and usually very positive moments.
This is one of those rare places that will survive because of what we did, because of the intervention that was made, and because of the citizens of the county who, you know, said, yes, we want to support this. Yeah, and we've seen, you know, so many large estates and natural areas become subdivisions or, you know, strip malls or whatever. This place won't.
It's hard to imagine that Bill Mewborn and John Lusk and the major players of the Park District at the time that this became a park could ever imagine the scope of what Wildwood has become. It's just a pivotal place in our community.
I think that what's come to pass certainly exceeded anything that they could have hoped for. I think that they had a sense of how important this was, and that was what motivated them.
And here we are 40 years out. I can't believe that you know, I can remember this 40 years myself, and just seeing the wonder of what's transpired here. But I know that 40 years from now, you know, God willing and the creek don't rise, this park will still be here.
Well, personally, I have 5 children, 12 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild on its way. And I think this is going to be there for them, their entire lives, and for all generations to come. And if the Wildwood Committee hadn't made this a Metropark, it would be a nice place today to drive your car through and look at some pretty homes. But that didn't happen. And we have this park here today that hopefully will be here hundreds of years from now, looking the same as it does today. And it's due to just a bunch of little people going out there and rallying a committee up and getting a vote through at a time when it couldn't happen. It couldn't happen. Everybody was shocked, I guess, when it was passed, because those things at that time didn't happen. And people voted to pay more taxes to have this. And here it is. And I'm sitting in it today.